$24 could keep a mountain cabin supplied with lamp oil and flour until spring. In Cinder Creek, on the last freezing night of November, Harlan Voss claimed it could also settle the price of a woman. "Debt is debt," Voss said. The words carried across Bellwether Freight House, where teamsters crowded around a pot-bellied stove and rain glazed the windows like dull glass. Gideon Vale stood near the loading door with a coil of trapline wire under one arm and a sack of salt at his boots. He had come down from the pass for provisions, not trouble. Trouble, however, had a way of recognizing men who preferred silence. Mara Ellison stood beside the freight counter with her wrists bound in front of her. She was small beneath a gray coat, too thin for the weather. One sleeve had split at the shoulder. A bruise darkened the side of her face, but she held her chin level while Voss waved a paper above the crowd. $24 for meals, lodging, and medicine, furnished to her mother, he announced. She cannot pay. Black Spur can use another pair of hands. Several men looked away. The Black Spur logging camp sat beyond county reach, 3 days north if the trail stayed open. Men went there owing money. They returned owing more, if they returned at all. Deputy Owen Pike stood near the stove, one thumb hooked behind his gun belt. "The note bears her mark," he said, though he did not sound proud of it. Mara looked at him. "I can write my own name." Voss smiled without warmth. "Not when the note was made. That was after my mother died, and before you learned gratitude." A few men laughed. Gideon did not. He watched Mara's hands. The rope had rubbed the skin raw, yet she did not pull against it. She had learned that resistance only tightened certain knots. Voss tugged her toward the rear door. "Unless one of you charitable gentlemen wants to cover the account." No one moved. Mara spoke without looking at Voss. "My sewing box goes with me." The room quieted. It was not a plea for rescue. It was an inventory request, the kind a person made after accepting that everything else had already been taken. Gideon set down the wire. He crossed the room with no hurry in his stride. Voss noticed him only when Gideon laid 4 $5 bills and 4 silver dollars on the counter. "Stamp the note paid," Gideon said. Voss's gaze slid from the money to Gideon's face. "You buying the debt or the girl?" "The paper." The room tightened around the answer. Voss tapped the edge of the note against his palm. "Once I release my claim, what you do with her is no concern of mine. It should have been no concern of yours before." Rafe Doolin, Voss's broad-shouldered enforcer, stepped away from the wall. Gideon turned his head just enough to meet his eyes. Rafe stopped. Voss gathered the money, counted it twice, then pressed Bellwether's red stamp into an ink pad and struck the bottom of the note. "Paid in full." He cut the rope from Mara's wrists with a freight knife and tossed her sewing box onto the counter. "There. Vale owns the trouble now." The laughter returned, thinner than before. Gideon picked up the stamped note and held it out to Mara. She stared at it. "It is yours," he said. Her fingers closed around the paper, but her expression did not change. Gideon took his provisions and walked toward the front door. After 3 steps, he heard Mara lift the sewing box. After 5, he heard her follow. Outside, freezing rain swept sideways through Cinder Creek. Gideon led his mule from the hitching rail. Juniper flattened her ears at the weather but stood steady while he tied the supplies behind the saddle. "Mrs. Barlow runs the boarding house across the creek," he told Mara. "She will give you a room." Mara's gaze moved to the dark street. "For how much?" "I will settle it." Something shuddered behind her eyes. "Then I will owe you more." "No. You paid the paper." It was false. You did not ask whether it was false. Gideon looked at the marks circling her wrists. Did not need to. He started toward the creek bridge. Mara followed 2 paces behind, carrying the sewing box against her ribs. They had gone less than a quarter mile when the mountain cracked. The sound rolled down from the northern ridge, deep and heavy. Snow, rock, and broken pine swept across the lower road in a gray-white surge. Men shouted from the freight yard. Horses reared in their traces. When the rumble faded, the road to Mrs. Barlow's boarding house lay buried beneath a fresh slide. Pike rode up through the sleet and pulled his hat low. "Creek Road is gone. Maybe 2 days before we clear it." Gideon looked at Mara. Rain had soaked through her coat. Her lips were losing color. "My cabin is above the slide," he said. "1 night, perhaps 2. She gave a single nod, as though terms had been stated and accepted. He helped her onto Juniper, careful to keep his hands where she could see them. Then he took the lead rope and walked. The mule climbed better without a rider tugging at her mouth, and Gideon trusted her feet more than his own in ice. By dusk, Cinder Creek had disappeared below a curtain of snow. The cabin stood beneath a shelf of black rock, half sheltered by firs. Gideon opened the door and stepped aside. Mara did not enter until he moved several feet away. Inside were 1 narrow bed, a table, 2 chairs, a stone hearth, and shelves stacked with jars and folded blankets. A square wooden hatch lay flush with the floor near the pantry wall. Mara saw it immediately. Gideon struck a match and touched flame to the kindling. "You may take the bed." Her eyes moved from the bed to the door, then to the iron latch, then back to the hatch. "I can heat stew," he said, "or beans." She did not answer. He straightened slowly. "Mara, where will you lock me?" The match burned close to his fingers. He let it fall into the hearth. She pointed toward the floor. "If it is down there, leave the hatch open a little." Voss used a coal room. There was no window, and when the lamp went out I could not tell if it was morning. Gideon had spent years believing silence was safer than the wrong words. Now silence felt like cowardice. "I will not lock you anywhere." Mara's face remained still. "Then where do you expect me to sleep?" "Wherever you choose." "What work do you expect?" "None tonight." "And after tonight?" He heard the question beneath the question. "What must I surrender when the kindness ends?" Gideon reached into his coat and removed the cabin key. He placed it on the table between them. "That opens the front door," he said. "It will be in your keeping." Mara did not touch it. He nodded toward the stamped note in her hand. "Do you want that burned?" "No." Her answer came quickly. Men like Voss believe paper before they believe people. Gideon pulled a pencil stub from a shelf, turned the note over, and wrote in slow block letters. "The debt named on the reverse has been paid in full. Mara Ellison owes Gideon Vale no money, labor, service, or obedience of any kind." He signed beneath it and dated the line. Then he pushed the paper and the key toward her. She read every word twice. Gideon crossed to the pantry hatch. He opened it, took a screwdriver from his toolbox, and began removing the iron hinges. Mara watched him. "What are you doing?" "Making certain I cannot forget what I just said." The screws resisted. He leaned his weight into the handle until each one turned. When the last hinge came free, he lifted the hatch and carried it outside. Snow blew across the threshold. "There is a lean-to behind the cabin," he said. "I will sleep there tonight. You will freeze. I have blankets." He brought in an armload of wood, set a pot beside the hearth, and left food and water within her reach. At the doorway, he paused. If you want the door locked, turn the key. If you want it open, leave it open. Both choices are yours. Mara stood beside the table, with the key in one hand and the stamped note in the other. Gideon stepped outside. The door closed behind him. A moment later, he heard the key turn. He walked around to the lean-to, spread his buffalo robe over the straw, and lay down fully clothed while snow whispered against the roof. He expected the sound of the lock to feel like rejection. Instead, it was the first honest answer she had given him. Inside the cabin, Mara kept the key clenched in her fist until the metal warmed against her skin. At dawn, Gideon woke in the lean-to with ice in his beard and one shoulder gone numb beneath him. He sat up, listening. No shouting, no broken glass, no frightened breathing from the cabin, only the measured scrape of pencil against paper. He crossed the yard and stopped outside the door. Mara? A pause. Then the lock turned. She opened the door no wider than the length of her hand. The key hung from a cord around her neck. I counted what is here, she said. Inside, the table had been covered with neat rows of supplies. Potatoes in groups of 10, salt measured into tin cups, firewood marked in chalk along the wall. Gideon's flour sacks had been pulled from the pantry and set beside the scale. On a sheet, torn from an old trapping ledger, Mara had written columns of figures in a careful, narrow hand. 312 pounds of potatoes, she said, 27 pounds of beans, 11 pounds of smoked venison, enough lamp oil for 36 nights if used sparingly. Gideon took off his gloves. You slept? A little. You did not need to do this. I need to know the cost. There is no cost. Her fingers tightened around the pencil. There is always a cost. Sometimes men wait to name it. He could have argued. He could have told her again that the paper said she owed him nothing. But she had already read those words. The trouble was not that she failed to understand them. The trouble was that no one had ever made them true. Gideon set a kettle on the stove. Door open or closed? Mara glanced at him. For what? While we eat. Her eyes moved toward the yard. Snow still swept between the pines. Open, she said. He left it open. Cold air crawled across the floor while they ate beans from tin bowls. Gideon did not complain. Mara watched him once, perhaps waiting for him to change his mind, but he only added another split log to the fire. When she reached for the kettle, her sleeve slipped back. The rope marks around her wrists had swollen overnight. One had split again, leaving a thin red line across the skin. Gideon looked away from it before speaking. I have pine salve and clean cloth. Mara's shoulders stiffened. I can set them on the table, he said. You can use them yourself, or I can help, your choice. She studied his hands. They were broad enough to close around both her wrists at once. Set them down. He did. Mara opened the tin, tried to spread the salve with 2 fingers, and winced when her left hand trembled. She tried again. Gideon waited by the stove. After a long silence, she said, You may wrap the right one. He pulled a chair across from her, but did not sit until she nodded. Then he wound the cloth slowly, leaving enough room for 2 fingers beneath it. Too tight? No. The other? She hesitated, then extended her left wrist. By the time he tied the second knot, the cabin no longer felt warm. It felt delicate, as if one careless movement could break something neither of them knew how to name. Mara drew her hands back. Thank you, she said, and the words sounded more frightening to her than the pain had. Gideon turned to the flour sacks. "You moved these? They are wrong." He lifted one onto the scale. The stamp read 50 pounds. The needle settled at 42. He weighed the second, 41.5. "The road ice did not eat 8 pounds of flour," Mara said. Gideon examined the red freight mark burned into the burlap. "Bellwether. I bought these yesterday. He has been doing it for months." "Voss?" Mara picked up her sewing box. She placed it on the table and ran her thumb over the scratched walnut lid. The brass clasp had been bent and repaired more than once. For the first time since leaving Cinder Creek, fear showed plainly in her face. Not fear of Gideon. Fear of being believed too late. "My mother taught me figures," she said. "Mrs. Barlow taught me ledgers after Mama became ill. Voss hired me because his drivers could not keep a clean account." She opened the box. Thread, needles, 2 bone buttons, and a folded square of blue cloth filled the top tray. Mara removed them one by one. Beneath the tray, she pressed a thumbnail into the lining and lifted a strip of fabric that had been stitched back with dark thread. A single page lay hidden beneath it. Gideon unfolded the paper carefully. The sheet was packed with dates, wagon numbers, destinations, weights, and names. Some entries appeared twice. Others had been scraped away and rewritten. Beside several names were debts for food, medicine, blankets, or transport. $24 appeared next to Mara Ellison. In a second column, the same medicine had been charged to Edith Barlow's boarding house. "You copied this?" "From the main book. Voss caught me before I could take more. Why not give it to Pike?" "I tried." Mara's voice lost its steadiness. "He said a copied page was not proof. Voss said I stole cash and altered the figures. Then he showed Pike the note with my mark. You said you can write your name." "I can. That is why he broke 2 fingers on my right hand before he pressed it to the paper." Gideon looked at the careful columns again. The numbers were not just numbers now. They were flour taken from winter stores, medicine sold twice, wages converted into chains no judge had ordered. How many people? Enough that he cannot let the page reach a circuit court. Outside, Juniper brayed once from the shelter. Gideon went to the doorway and looked down the buried trail toward Cinder Creek. Snow had filled every hoofprint from the night before. The slide would slow men. It would not stop them forever. He had thought Voss lost $24 and a frightened clerk. What Voss had lost was a witness, an account, and the lie that kept half the valley in his debt. Gideon closed the door against the wind. This time, he did not touch the lock. "Show me every mark on that page," he said. Mara looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled the second chair to the table and began. Over the next 3 weeks, Mara turned Gideon's cabin into a place governed by numbers instead of fear. She marked each sack with its true weight, divided the beans into weekly portions, and calculated how long the lamp oil would last if they burned it only after dark. Gideon stopped calling the work unnecessary when her rationing stretched their flour nearly twice as far as his old habits would have. In return, he taught her the mountain. He showed her how to fasten snowshoes so the rawhide would not cut her ankles, how to find north when clouds swallowed the sun, and how to read the shallow crescent where a deer had broken through crusted snow. Juniper became Mara's first patient teacher. The mule refused to move when Mara pulled hard on the lead rope, but followed when she loosened her grip and walked beside her. "She does not like being forced," Mara said. "Neither do most creatures with sense." The answer almost made her smile. By Christmas, she no longer asked the price of every meal. She still wore the cabin key around her neck, though now it sometimes rested outside her dress instead of hidden beneath it. One afternoon, Gideon took her to a timber frame on the ridge above the cabin. An iron bell hung there, dark with rust. "Storm signal," he said. "3 long strikes. The logging camps answer if they hear it." Mara ran a gloved finger along the cracked rope. "Does it still work?" "It will." They replaced the rope, scraped rust from the clapper, and tested it once. The sound rolled across the white valley, low and solemn. Far away, another bell answered. That night, while snow pressed against the windows, Mara found Gideon holding a small wooden comb. One tooth had broken near the middle. "My sister's," he said before she could ask. "Lydia was 17 when her wagon party crossed too late. I was guiding hunters north. By the time I found the trail, the storm had covered it." Mara sat across from him but did not reach for the comb. "Did you find her?" "In spring." The fire settled with a soft collapse. "So when you saw me at Bellwether," Mara said, "you saw her. At first." Her face tightened. Gideon looked up. "Then I saw you. I cannot spend my life proving you arrived in time this once." "No." He closed his hand around the comb. "And you should not have to." The answer loosened something between them. Not enough to become a promise. Enough to become truth. Near the end of January, Gideon found 3 horses' tracks below the eastern ridge. The riders had used the old charcoal road, avoiding the main trail. One horse dragged its left rear hoof. Rafe Doolan's gray gelding had done the same outside Bellwether. Gideon returned to the cabin before dusk. "They are coming." Mara folded the copied ledger page and slid it inside her coat. "How many?" "3. "Voss and Rafe?" "Likely. The third may be Pike." Gideon lifted the cellar ladder from the open hatch. "There is a ravine behind the spruce line. You can reach the south camp before dark." Mara looked at the ladder, then at him. "You want me to hide underground? I want you alive. And when they ask where I went, I will lie. They will search. They will burn this place if they must. Then take Juniper." "And leave you to explain my evidence?" His jaw hardened. "Mara." "No." It was the first time she had refused him without lowering her eyes. She took the cabin key from around her neck and tied it securely to her belt. Then she placed the stamped debt note beside the copied ledger inside her coat. "I spent too long letting Voss speak for me," she said. "If Pike has come, he will hear the account from my mouth." Hoofbeats sounded below the ridge. Gideon reached for his rifle. Mara opened the door herself and stepped into the snow. The 3 riders emerged through the trees in single file. Voss came first, in a black coat. Rafe followed on the limping gray, a shotgun across his thighs. Deputy Pike rode last. Voss stopped 20 feet from the cabin. "Mara Ellison, you are charged with stealing company money and falsifying records." Pike drew a folded warrant, but did not open it. Mara stepped into the yard, the key at her belt clicking against the buckle. "I stole nothing." "Then return what you took." "You mean the page showing that you charged Edith Barlow twice for my mother's medicine?" Pike looked at Voss. Mara held up the copied ledger and read, "Wagon 12, flour billed to Black Spur and the Mercer widow. Wagon 19, lamp oil charged to the schoolhouse but delivered to Voss's store. Medicine entered once against Mara and again against Mrs. Barlow. Copied lies," Voss said. Gideon cut open a Bellwether flour sack and hung it from the porch scale. The needle stopped 8 pounds short. Voss's face hardened. "Rafe." Rafe dismounted. Gideon lowered his rifle. "Stay there." Pike raised one hand. "Nobody moves." Voss moved anyway. He snatched the ledger page and thrust it toward the lantern on his saddle. Pike caught his wrist. "You said you came to recover evidence." "I came to destroy a forgery." Voss tore free. The page caught fire along one edge. Mara lunged. Rafe seized her coat, and Gideon struck him with the rifle stock. Rafe staggered, raised the shotgun, and fired. The blast tore across Gideon's side and threw him into the snow. For one breath, Mara saw only blood. Then Voss fired at Pike. The deputy dove behind the water trough. Mara ran uphill. Rafe followed. She reached the storm bell, caught the new rope, and pulled. One long strike crossed the valley. She pulled again. Rafe was nearly upon her when she dragged the rope down a third time. The bell thundered. Beyond the ridge, another bell answered. Rafe grabbed for her. Mara ducked, drove her shoulder into his injured leg, and sent him against the frame. She tore away the shotgun and kicked it down slope. At the cabin, Voss bent over Gideon, searching his coat for the stamped note. Mara ran back. "Those papers belong to me." Voss turned his revolver toward her. Pike rose behind the trough with his gun leveled. "Lower it, Harlan." Voss fired and missed. Pike's return shot knocked the weapon from his hand. Mara seized the shackles from Voss's saddle, drove him against the storage shed, and locked one cuff around his wrist and the other through the iron hasp. "No window," Mara said, "but you will have daylight." Voices rose below the ridge. Loggers appeared through the trees. One lifted the scorched page from the snow. "My name is here," he said. Another leaned over it. "Mine too." Pike accepted the shackle key only after Mara offered it. "Harlan Voss, you are under arrest." Two loggers bound Rafe's hands. Mara dropped beside Gideon and pressed both palms over his wound. His eyes opened. "You stayed," he whispered. "No," she said. "I stood." The wound missed his lung, though healing took most of February. Pike carried Voss and Rafe down the mountain. Edith Barlow confirmed the duplicated charges, and the circuit judge ordered Bellwether's books seized. Names once written beneath false debts became witnesses. When the spring road opened, he saddled Juniper and tied food and a blanket behind the seat. He placed the cabin key in Mara's hand, though she already carried her own. "You paid $24 once," she said. "For a piece of paper. And this? Call it the price of knowing you can leave." Mara rode toward Cinder Creek without looking back. Gideon stood in the thawing yard until the trees swallowed her. 3 weeks passed. One morning, Juniper's bray pulled him from the woodshed. Mara was riding up the trail beside a wagon carrying lumber, blankets, and a painted sign. She uncovered it. Vale and Ellison Winter Station. "Pike needs a clerk," she said. "Mrs. Barlow needs help keeping relief accounts. I accepted both." Gideon touched the sign. "And this? A shelter for travelers caught on the pass, with honest waits, open records, and doors that lock only from the inside." He looked at her. "Did you come back because you believe you owe me?" Mara took out her key. "I came back because the road belonged to me in both directions." She unlocked the cabin. Spring light reached the cellar, where no hatch remained. Gideon stopped beside her. "May I hold your hand?" Mara looked at his scarred palm. Then she placed her hand in it. Yes. They entered together beneath a roof that held 2 keys, 2 names, and no debt between them.